Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Corey from Aquarium Co-op, and today we're going to talk about my 10 best fish if you're a beginner in the hobby. Now these primarily are around kind of a community tank style, and all of them can kind of live together. I mean, you wouldn't want all these in a 10-gallon together, but if you had a bigger tank and things like that, for sure they could work. And so the first one I've got up for bat is the black neon tetra. Now this is a Tetra that has always been fairly cheap, been very hardy, gets a little bit bigger than your like neon Tetra and that kind of stuff. And somehow they just seem to withstand the new person mistakes. And that might be water quality issues or temperature issues or whatever it's going to be, right? And so these guys are a nice schooling fish. They're usually $2 or $3. Get a group of like 6 or more. I wouldn't say go for 50 of them or something. Like if you're new, go with a few, go with 6, maybe 12, and get them and enjoy them and for how hardy they are. Now, they're going to give you that sense of confidence and everything that you need to go forward, and you're going to have this like barometer, right? So you got some fish, they did well, they look good, they're schooling around, they're interacting with your live plants, they're doing everything you want to do. And then you can get other fish and you go, oh, these act differently, or oh, they are seemingly a little more sensitive to what I do. Now, what's nice about these is they do tolerate a wide variety of temperatures, a wide variety of water parameters, a wide variety of just like skill level in general. They're forgiving as far as a pet goes. Now, that just means they're a little lower maintenance. They aren't too picky when it comes to eating and things like that, and they genuinely transition really well. Now, all of this is on the back of experience of our own store that we own, right? And so I've been doing this for over 10 years with one-on-one people just like you going, oh, you're new to the aquariums. What do you think of this fish? This fish is going to be great. You're going to be successful with this fish. Take it home, get used to it. Let me know how it goes in a week or two, and we'll go from there. And it's a good starting block fish, whether you're setting up a kid for the aquarium, whether it's your own aquarium, whether it's an aquarium for my grandmother. It's a great staple to have in there. It's not too flashy. Because it's got the color of black on it, it can go with a lot of other colors. You're not mixing blue with more blue with more blue. You actually get to see these different schools kind of interact, and that's a good thing. So the black neon tetra, a great starter fish. Next up, I've got the Cooley Loach. Now, the Cooley Loach is a bottom dweller. It's going to hang out down low. They're fairly nocturnal, and what that means is they don't like a whole lot of light. They would prefer, like right now you see me, I'm nice and bright. They prefer this, like, oh, the light came down, and they're going to be more active when the light is dim. So if you can dim the light down or turn one of the lights off or something like that when you're feeding them, it makes it a lot easier for them. They like to hang out at the bottom of caves and rock formations, pieces of wood, roots of plants, any of those things, and get yourself a little group or posse of these of 3 to 6. They're, little worms that kind of hang out in there, and they're good scavengers. And so you do need to feed them. They don't get much bigger than about that, and they're cool because they're snakes, and kids love them, adults love them. The only person that doesn't love them is the person that has to catch them at the store because they're so hard to catch with a net. But they honestly are a good fish, and in general, over the swath of Cooley Loaches, not often do they actually get sick. It's not that they can't, but in general, if it looks good to you while you're in the store, it's actually going to be an easy transition to take home. Usually, if there's ever problems with Cooley Loaches, it's going to happen at the store before you even get a chance to buy it. So they're also a kind of a long-lived fish. Oftentimes, they are one of the last remaining fish if someone's neglected an aquarium or they've had that tank and they haven't bought fish in 7 years. They'll still have some Cooley Loaches in there that kind of live a longer lifespan. And because they're hidden most of the time, they don't really run into the problem of aggression from other aggressive fish, but none on the list or on this list are going to be that aggressive or anything, so you shouldn't run into that problem. Next up, we have the Bristlenose Plecomus. Now, this is my most recommended algae eater or kind of cleanup crew type of fish. Now, I don't think that every aquarium has to have one, but in general, everyone ends up owning one. Subtle difference, I know. You can balance an aquarium without needing something to eat algae, but most people get one because they look cool. It's a different level. They kind of hang out at the bottom or up on the glass. They're a sucker fish. My friend had a sucker fish. I'm getting a sucker fish. Someone walks into the pet store and goes, I need a sucker fish. And so you end up with one. And if you're going to end up with one, the Bristlenose Plecomus is a great choice. The male gets all these bristles on his face, and that's how you know it's a male. The female, not so much. Now, they do want a little bit of wood in their diet, so if you got some driftwood in there, that helps. They do want some meat in their diet, so get them some good quality food. And they do want to eat on some algae, and they want to eat all the time. And again, like a Cooley Loach, they prefer to do that when it's a little more dim out. Part of the issue you can run into is if you've got other bigger fish in there and you drop the food in, they gobble up all the food, and the bristlenose doesn't get time to eat because they eat slow. So they want to eat over the course of hours and hours, whereas tetras and other things that are in your fish tank want to eat over the course of a couple of minutes, right? And so that can become a little bit of a challenge. Watch for a belly that's kind of, it's not sunken in, but maybe a little bit of a pooch going on there. That's how you know you're getting some food. If it gets way too big, you could have a parasite problem or something like that. But just, make sure it's not concave going in where they're starving. And you do have to feed them, not just algae alone or just the wood in the aquarium alone. They can't sustain on just what's already there. They do take a dedicated effort to be fed. They're highly tolerant of all different types of water parameters, temperatures. You can keep them with goldfish, you can keep them with tetras, you can keep them with discus. They really go with this wide span, are forgiving, but they do have a preferred range, and that's kind of moderate in the middle there of like, pH is 7 to 7.5. Temperatures 72 to 80, in that span of what's normal tropical fish, community fish temperatures and ranges, they do really well. And so that's going to allow most people in the United States and most people around the world to have success with this fish. Next up, I've got the Harlequin rasbora. Now, this makes everyone's beginner fish list, and I think it's because it looks so cool. And it's got the elements of like the black neon tetra where it's very hardy. It also tends to be a cheaper fish, usually under about $4. Now this fish gets about that big. The orange can get very intense on the males, and it's got black on there as well. And in general, it's a nice schooling fish. Again, kind of 6 or more on that. And as you fall in love with them, maybe you go to 12, 18, depending on how big your aquarium is. But they are readily available at most pet stores. I would be shocked if your pet store doesn't carry them. If they don't, they can probably order them. And wide variety of parameters. Like all the fish on this list, we want it to be easy for a beginner, and therefore we don't want some niche fish. If you don't do these things perfect, it's not going to do well. So I'm going to leave it at that, but the one thing I'll say here is when you're mixing schools of fish, it doesn't do nearly as well. If I've got 3 black neon tetras and I'll take 3 rasboras, that makes 6. Now I have a school. That's not how that works. It needs to be 6 of those black neon tetras and 6 of these rasboras, and they're going to feel a lot more comfortable in their groups. Even though you might only see them group up half the time and they might intermingle the other time, they need that social time with their own kind to really put on the best color, behave correctly, and give you the longest longevity out of your purchase and enjoyment. Next up, we've got another bottom dweller, and that is the albino Corydora. And I like this fish because it's kind of devoid of color. It's that yellowy, whitish color that stands out. So if you had, if we were going down the list here and we had black neon tetras and we had rasboras, and so you've got black and you've got orange, and now you've got kind of this albino or white color. They're all going to stand out against each other really nicely, right? And so these guys are a schooling catfish, or at least a group catfish that lives down low, and they get about 2.5 inches, and they tend to be very hardy and cheap. So those are good things when it comes to be picking out beginner fish. And what their job is to pick up kind of after you feed food, you're new to the hobby, a bunch of food's coming through, and you need someone to kind of get that off the gravel for you and help break it down. These guys are going to help. It's kind of like having, a little herd of chihuahuas, which I do. I have 3 little dogs, and if I was to drop a chip onto the floor, don't get out the broom, the dog will take care of it. That's what the Corydoras will do for you as well. Now, I still have to feed my dogs every day, just like they're eating crumbs off the floor. Same with these Corydoras. You got to feed them every day, but they will eat those crumbs, and they're lovable. If you watch closely every once in a while, you'll see one blink. That's kind of a cool thing. Even though fish don't blink, the way they turn their eye looks like they blink, and so that makes them a lot more humanized, and so they're usually a family favorite. Now, if you really can't stand the albino part of it, they do make non-albino versions, but the albino versions, for some reason, seem to be more hardy and more readily available and cheaper, and they stand out really nice. And so when you get that kind of dark green catfish or something like that. It hides back in the plants. You don't see it as well. This you can see from a mile away. So really highly recommended. Get yourself 6 or more, hopefully, if it's a smaller aquarium. There's some other Corridor options, but the albinos are really nice. Next up on my list are cherry barbs. Now, you might have heard barbs. Barbs are aggressive. Yes, some barbs are very aggressive. The cherry barbs tend to be on the not aggressive. I would say they're not really any more aggressive than your average Tetra or Rasbora of the cherry barb variety. Now, the males get all this really dark red color and look amazing. And then the females get this like, kind of tannish red and don't look as amazing. But if you don't have females, the males won't look as good. 2, you have a chance that you could breed these in your aquarium. You could have a group of 6, you got 3 boys, 3 girls, and a year later you go, hey, I have a 7th. One made it. Now they might be laying eggs every single day, and they might be getting eaten by all your catfish and your Cooley Loaches and all of that, and you're probably happy because you don't want 7,000 cherry barbs after 2 years, right? You just want some more to replace the generations and build the school a little bit. Very tolerant of water parameters, whether it's temperature, pH, anything like that. And they have a nice temperament, and they eat mid-water. They swim mid-water. You know, and think about it. You got orange, you got red, you got albino, you got maybe a brown bristlenose, you got a striped Cooley Loach, and now you have this bright red fish to kind of go with it, all against a green backdrop of live plants. It's starting to really come together as a good-looking tank with all individual personalities with these types of fish. And, you know, by this point, you wouldn't be having much problems, which is good. That's what we want. We want a very successful community tank. Next up, we have the monk tetra, or the red-eye tetra. And this tetra is a very robust tetra. It gets to be a bigger body. It gets to be a little bit longer. It's typically a little cheaper. It's not as flashy. But this is one that if you had, you know, well, we didn't know when we were new and we bought those balla sharks and we bought that rainbow shark and we bought these things that kind of chase other things, this would be a great fish to add in. You get a group of 6 or more of these monk tetras, and they're just going to school around, kind of be silver and flashy, have that eye to them, and mostly just eat mid-water. They're slightly more fast than your average fish to go and get food, but that's okay. They mix in with all the other fish that we've recommended, and they're very hardy and tolerant of wide water parameters and forgiving. So that's why they make the list. They're a good one to start with if you didn't have anything else. If you like the way they look, get even more. One of the tanks we run, we actually caught some in the wild, a sister species that is very close to this that live in one of our associates' tank, Dean, with a lungfish. Perfect example of a fish that needed to be there, big-bodied, so it didn't get eaten by this big lungfish, but looks great. But you might keep it in a planted tank and it looks good there too. So, you know, subtle colors like silvers and blacks look really good against the backdrop of green. And if you have the rainbow of color with your other fish, sometimes a silver really stands out and looks nice. Like, oh, that's just a nice fish right there. Next up, we have the white cloud. Now, what I want to be specific about here is there's a few different varieties, and they're all cool. What I want to make sure is you don't buy feeder white clouds. And what's a feeder white cloud? Oh, feeder white cloud means that it was grown and it's meant to be fed to another fish as a food source. They're not taken care of that well, and they're not a great beginner fish if it's meant to be eaten. Now, you get a normal white cloud that's a couple of bucks, and it's about this big, and it doesn't have to have a heater, and it can go outside for at least part of the year. Here it can go around year-round, and they can live in small tanks, and the males, they spar with each other, and by sparring, they just kind of put up their fins like a peacock and go, hey, I look super cool to all the other males and girls, and you get to witness that. It makes a great addition to your aquarium. I wouldn't put them in if you're keeping temperatures very hot. They don't do that. So what they're really good at is tolerating almost everything except for super high temperatures. Water parameters, pH almost doesn't matter, hardness almost doesn't matter, but when you start getting above about 80 degrees, they start running into some illness problems. And, for this tank that we're kind of making here, most people won't be too far over 80. So if you live in a country where AC might be hard to come by and it's really hot, this wouldn't be a great fish. But like in the United States, it makes a great fish, and a lot of other countries as well. Next up, I want to add in another cleaner fish, the Siamese algae eater, not to be confused with the Chinese algae eater or the Siamese fighting fish. No, the Siamese algae eater. Now, this is a fish that gets about 6 inches. So you're going, hey, that's a big fish. Yes, it could be a big fish in your aquarium. They're very good at eating hair algae and different types of algae, and they got a specific mouth that's kind of downturned, and they're always like cleaning on things. And what I like about it is that bigger fish. It does kind of bring in that shark look for some people that want that. And it's going to help you keep your plants clean, keep your glass clean, keep your wood clean, all of that stuff. It's going to be eaten, but it'll also eat flake food and any food you're going to put in there. And so with these guys, yeah, they are a schooling fish, but in general, I find that they do well as a 1 of for people or a 3 of. I don't recommend the number 2. 2 is always kind of a bad number, but 1 or 3 or more is a good one for this. They tolerate very wide water parameters. I don't know that I've really seen water parameters outside of something extreme and crazy that fish won't live in that they don't do okay in. Now, middle of the road for a community tank, they're going to thrive with that. Make sure they get some food. They are quite fast, and they'll make sure they get their portion of food. So if you got an army of these Siamese algae eaters, make sure you're putting in quite a bit of food. But in general, they are really nice for blackbeard algae, hair algae, and just kind of that nice fish to have an extra of like, oh, look what the Siamese algae eater is doing. Now, if you do get that Chinese algae eater, that guy gets to like a foot, not 6 inches, like a foot, 10 inches, real beefy, pretty aggressive, territorial. Now, these Siamese algae eaters can be a little bit territorial, but not nearly as much. And if they're going to be the bully of your tank, it's okay. They're not nearly as bad as a lot of other fish. So, yeah, and I would say their diet does change. When they're younger, they tend to eat lots of, well, they're growing, right? So they eat a lot. They just eat lots of algae, lots of food, all of that. And as they get bigger and they can get the lion's share of that fish food you're putting in there, you might say, hey, that guy got lazy. He's not eating algae anymore. Might be getting enough of the frozen bloodworms and other treats you're given, so he's not, kind of mowing the lawn for you. So you might cut back on food a little bit if that's going on. The last one I've got for you is a Livebearer. Now, typically, I don't advise too many different Livebearers for new people because they have specific water requirements, and they're beautiful but can be heavily inbred. When it comes to this Livebearer, the Endler's Livebearer, it's a very basic Livebearer. Lots of color in it. Looks kind of like a wild guppy, but because it looked so good in the wild, it has never been able or never needed to be line bred so that we get the color. And what that means is it's very adaptable. So it can live in pHs as low as kind of 6.5. It likes 7 and higher, but it can live down there. And it can tolerate maybe down to 68 degrees, maybe 65 degrees as far as temperature goes. And it can go to 82, 84. And like right now, I've got a colony of them living with my turtles, and they just keep reproducing, and they make a ton. So if you're looking for that, I want to make a ton, not buy very many, this is a great fish to do that, and it's forgiving. They don't have giant tails on them to get bacterial infections or anything like that. They're a nimble fish. They're quick, so they don't get picked on by your tetras and other stuff. And all of these little things that happen to Livebearers, we make this big, beautiful animal that looks great, but then it's slow to get to the food, so its immune system's compromised. Oh, it's getting snacked on by a Siamese algae eater a little bit because it's territorial. Oh, this thing's happening and that thing's happening. All those are out the window. We just have this very nimble, good-looking little fish that reproduces for you, that's highly tolerant of everything, and runs, typically $4 or less depending on where you're at. And great little addition. I like to wake up to having little babies in my aquarium. Even if, only 1 out of 100 ever makes it, it's still a good feeling to go, hey, my tank's pushing forward and making new growth, whether it's new plants, new fish, all of that. And it's a good thing to have, and your aquarium's alive, and something new is always going on in there. So I hope this list helped you. If you want more information like this, obviously you could subscribe and watch more of our YouTube videos, but the best resource that we have for you is actually on our blog at theaquariumcoop.com. We put out new articles every week talking about diseases, talking about fish, talking about plants, anything that's related to our hobby. We're putting it there. We have writers on staff and myself that go over to present information. We're here to educate. And so if you want that education, it's free. It's always free. And if you want to support us, please go to aquariumcoop.com and buy some of our products. That'll help us make more content for everyone. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.